Welcome to the Postgame. I'm Michael Brooks. Welcome, patrons, with super producer Matt Leck, chief economist David Griscom, super producer David Slavic, each and every one of you. Got a lot of stuff to get to in this next hour before we get back to show prep. Very stoked about the live show. It's on.
Yeah, man, me too.
It's going to be fucking awesome. Matter of fact, let's just start this way. We'll just do a craven build off of a David Griscom Twitter joke. There's some new found footage. I also would say, I think David Dole made this point. This Twitter account that's putting out these videos that make Bernie look cool, but they think it's damaging or something. These videos have already been around for a while, and it actually does look like they're sort of like filming them with a iPhone to make it look like it's some new footage. But a lot of these things have been around for a while. So everybody, I mean, I'm sure everybody's already seen this at this point, but it's such a pleasure. Why not watch it again? This is also a good preview of, particularly, obviously, I mean, Alona's going to be there tomorrow night, so obviously this will probably be the more sort of, you know, the Russia-based segment of tomorrow night's show. This is Bernie Sanders with a bunch of Soviets drinking and singing a great folk song.
Look at all those bottles.
Yeah, they're putting in work.
When people sit at the same table at the party, and one side of the table starts singing a song, when they finish it, the other side has to sing their own song. What are we gonna say? As director said, added to Victor's was, today, the distinctive feature of our economy is competition. This land was made for you and me.
Great 90s stash, too.
Yeah, so, you know, what else is to add? That's
I
awesome.
mean, it's fun shit, man.
It's fun shit. All right. We can't, I'm sorry, no, we'll not get to all calls tonight, but let's try to get to some. You're calling, I believe it's +44. I think that's the UK. Go ahead. Am I right? And where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello.
Hello?
Hello. You're on.
Hi, Michael. It's Daniel from London.
Daniel, how you doing, man? Great to hear from you. What's on your mind?
Hey, great show. Bill Fletcher Jr. is amazing, man.
He's
Great
amazing.
guest.
He's a fucking treasure.
Hello?
Hello, you're here. We hear you.
Okay, it just cut off a bit. I just wanted to bring something up on Marilena Chauí, this leftist philosopher from Brazil. I'll just try to get her argument right and maybe have you guys comment on it, because I found it very interesting and quite apropos of our times. And her argument basically goes around saying that neoliberalism is a form of totalitarianism, because in totalitarian societies, it's not about the Il Duce being a clown on a podium. It's about everything within a state, it's about the society functioning as a whole, right? As one organism, so to speak.
Yeah.
And what she says is that in the neoliberal form of societal arrangements, everything is a business model. So from a hospital to an individual, the whole Homo economicus mentality, right? You develop yourself. You make you function in a market with a market logic, right? And what because of this, the way these things function, conflict cannot manifest itself, and the way to solve conflict in this type of society is through the justice system. And we talk about Brazil all the time and how the justice system is screwed up over there, and it has always been like that. Most of the judges that are active today were judges during the military period, so we inherited that system. But it's not an exclusivity of Brazil, right? In the U.S., there's the Trump administration is backing the courts of these justices, these conservatives. So
yeah, no doubt.
With all this background, how do we, as people with a revolutionary mentality, even understanding that there's the material conditions, and also that revolutions are not something that spontaneously just come up, right? These are things that are built. But anyway, how do we, accepting that the legitimacy of a justice system that is so classist and class-based, and that rules in terms of class interests, how can we win? That's the question in Brazil, in the U.S., and anywhere else.
No doubt. All right, David, you want to take a hack at this first?
Yeah, I just have a couple things that I was thinking about during your call. Just one very specific. It's like, if you ever have the chance, everyone should read. There's a great book by Alain Badiou called "In Praise of Love," and Alain Badiou is a very important French philosopher, communist philosopher, and a lot of his work in this book, he's reacting to what he's seeing, where even love, the interpersonal relationship between two people, something that is both very public but is also very private and intimate, is becoming a commodity and commodified. He's very worried. For example, he sees these advertisements for dating apps in Paris, and they promise you to fall in love without the fall, right? Because when you fall in love with somebody, it's a very violent thing. Actually, it can pull you apart from your job, your responsibilities, and all these things.
Not unless you're crushing it.
So Badiou's is very worried about this, because basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to take away this interruption to like the capitalist hegemony what we're all living in. And where he comes across in this very French, it's very romantic, forgive me, but he's like, to fall in love and to be in love, that's a very revolutionary thing, and it's something that's very important. And I say that because when we have a force and a system that is all across the board trying to infect, even like the very basic nature of human relations, and trying to say that, no, we are just economic subjects, right? Refusing that is a place where we can start to break those chains. And what comes from that is that's where you have an event. And those are those moments where you do get to make a choice, right? Because yes, under capitalism, you don't have these kind of individual choices, right? Where every day you can walk out and say like, I refuse capitalism. Well, no, you have to eat, you have to participate in the market, right? But you agitate and you refuse it in enough places of your life, and people continue to do that. They join revolutionary groups and continue that agitation until you have that event. And that event is sort of that moment where, capitalist power is very weak and anything is possible.
And this is another reason to step out of the vampire castle.
Yes.
Because all of that, like, not saving, first of all, it's a catastrophe in two ways, because it undermines the fact that there are a handful of people, but mainly institutions, but some people who are so entwined with those institutions that really need to be, got at in a way that's extremely politically aggressive. And then, of course, there's occasionally, obviously, some people, do things that are outside of the pale, whatever. But then there's like this much broader reality that it's a collective endeavor. We're all incredibly imperfect people. We all make mistakes, and we all need to work on each other and improve and help each other and have each other's backs. And part of the thing that the Vampire Castle is not only profoundly emotionally toxic and intellectually limited and a failed political project, it also, and Megan Days made this point a lot, it's another way that it mirrors neoliberalism, because these fights that look so important are actually, some of it's sincere and important, some of it's sincere and misguided, and a lot of it is actually using the rhetoric of liberation as proxies for market space and destruction of other people to like solidify your brand. So I actually like the direction Griscom's coming in, that you actually really, the anarchist ethos of like the 90s really overstated it because they ignored actual power. But conversely, I do think you actually need to create these greenhouses and these ecosystems where you are in your practices stepping out of the logic that we're living under. And that includes, love, compassion, empathy, forgiveness, complexity, all sorts of these things, which can sound very, even as I say it, I have the same reaction you did. I kind of recoil. It sounds soft. It sounds romantic. It sounds French, but it's true. And it's really important. And then I think conversely, and then I get to Matt, because I know Matt will have a good historical frame for this, if I'm not being presumptuous. But I think that the flip side of that is there's all of these cultural lessons that have to do with, I feel comfortable using the word spirituality, in fact, that have to do with how we are, how we're being, how we're treating each other, our humility, all of these things. And then conversely, the left globally, and definitely in the United States, and clearly also in Brazil, needs a way more rigorous and serious strategy on the courts. And I don't know what that answer is, because right now we've been caught in between, in a very narrow liberal sense. I think in the United States, people actually got too used to the courts. Like, the courts will solidify somebody's rights, not the social movement that brought about the rights, right? And that's a huge mistake. And then conversely, there were other people that, and look, to be fair, this is the most empathetic thing I will say to like a Jill Stein voter, and I don't have much empathy for them usually, but it's like, yes, every election cycle, that's what Democrats do. They say, you got to vote for us no matter how terrible we are because of the courts. And some people have gotten sick of it. Now, it's still a major miscalculation. They might literally make abortion illegal in a matter of days, right? That's but I understand the way in which it was misused to get people's votes. But that being said, the whole contingent of the left that ignored and negated the relentless power of the courts was delusional. It was wrong. But then add a third thing to the mix, and I want to be really clear. I don't think he had any other choice in the context he was in. But part of what the tragedy and the travesty and the grotesqueness of the imprisonment of Lula is his trusting I don't know. I'm assuming he's a lot more. I think Lula's incredibly savvy, but he chose the rhetorical strategy of trusting the justice system when at the same time he was articulating, and everybody in the Workers' Party was articulating, and anybody who understands the issue is articulating, this is a lawfare political persecution. So obviously these things are totally rigged. So that's put the left forces in another weird position. I don't know the answer to it. I could just say, this is too generic, but it's like there needs to be a left strategy on the courts that's incredibly rigorous, that recognizes the limitations of the present, but also has an aggressive strategy to expand the horizons of the future, because they are undemocratic.
Yeah, there basically needs to be a counter-revolution to what Quinn Slobodian outlines in The Globalists. because that was it was an active project, and it's going to take that. And the reason they knew it was going to be so effective for them is because it obviously depoliticized it. But we're talking about Bill Fletcher being a good communicator, and to kind of build off Griscom's point, communication is actually where it's at. It's not some great ideas out there that need to just be brought to the people. Like, you need to have an interaction between the people and these ideas, and that's actually where it's at. I guess that's all I have to say.
No, I think that's precisely it, and I actually think it's another example, frankly, in which we do need to learn from all of these horrible hegemonic forces that have created this hellscape we're in, which is that they think very strategically, they think very long term, and actually in their own demonic way, they think in a very utopian terms. So we do need to think, just as we're enacting in our own spaces where we can practice a different value set of what it means to be human outside of the market dictatorship, I think, we need to say, like, what are the rules of the road? What is the legal framework we need? That's the decades-long process. In the short term, the short-term answer is much more relative, which is you need to, in the United States, you need to elect Democrats who are forced and pressured to stuff the courts with liberal justices. Boring, workmanlike, also true. And I think,
True.
I definitely think on the Supreme Court, term limits, court packing, the Supreme Court at the bare minimum needs term limits. It's just such a catastrophically undemocratic.
Yeah, that was its intention too.
And it was precisely, that was its intention. Definitely. These are and what's been funny about the courts, is like, at least in the United States I could speak to, is like that dual function of, on one hand, they've been forces of aristocracy and anti-democracy, or they've just been lagging indicators on democratic sentiment. And, where they sort of like codify an emerging sort of social sort of consensus on something. And frankly, in both of those functions need to be checked by democratic will. Neither of those things are good. We don't need, of course I was thrilled when it came down, but and the way it was, and yes, in some sense, you do need the court to say marriage equality is the law of the land, because a lot of states would still treat gay people as second-class citizens. And at the same time, conversely, ultimately, the political project of ensuring that women have autonomy over their bodies, or gay people have full civil rights protections, needs to be fortified in a democratic will. Now, there's a dialectic, because on the other hand, yes, there is an important function where the court can step in and restrain abuse of a minority. That's a real thing. That's actually the type of liberal value that I think you can't just junk and be glib about. But overall, if you're trying to build a consensus and really root things in a society, they have to come from a broader democratic buy-in.
Yeah, and with regards to that whole protecting the minority thing, the game to watch here is to not let neoliberals or whatever the next iteration is, define rich person as a minority, which is specifically what the
100%.
Buchanan school wants to do.
If you read Democracy and Change, that's the whole. They actually tell a funhouse Marxism. They just invert it. Rich people are exploited. It's demented. Yeah.
Yeah.
David.
It's just and the minority issue too is this country the Supreme Court has a terrible track record when it comes to that. So that's one of those things, that's something that gets brought up a lot when I sort of come up with it, more like structural philosophical criticisms of the Supreme Court. It's what about the protection of minority? Well, yes, I agree with that, but that's not been the practice. And the point is that if we were to have a society where the Supreme Court was actively involving itself in protecting minorities, we would have a lot stronger political power across the country for the left. And this is the problem with the way that a lot of people think about the Supreme Court, is that the Supreme Court is just going to develop on its own without a political movement that brings in that way. And that's what we need to create.
Precisely. And by the way, those wins you're talking about were when those movements were happening. It's not a coincidence that the great civil rights cases that people talk about in the 50s and 60s, right. MLK was the most important non-elected official in the country at that point. Of course, yes.
Yeah, it
precisely.
is. I think Ian Millhiser's book goes into this, that it's very, when it does good things, it's because it is that bit sensitive to political pressure from the demos. Precisely. But I mean, that's not obviously the ruling force behind it.
Does that answer anything, Daniel? We went all over the place.
Oh, that's great takes. Great takes. Thanks for the show, and thanks for keeping it real with Brazil, man. We need every help we can get.
Oh, much appreciated, man. Thank you so much. Lula Livre.
Lula Livre.
Thank you.
We started with the communist philosopher on love and ended with the strategy for winning the Supreme Court of the United States.
That's how
pretty wide range.
That's how awesome the show is.
I like it.
That's it. If everybody watching and listening to this show could have a fluency in French Maoism and judicial strategy and electoral politics, we're definitely fulfilling our mandate. And this was actually a fun clip. This was Bernie Sanders explaining why he became a socialist as a young man. And, look, I want to just say, I think that there's now, I've started having conversations with Bill Fletcher Jr. in 2016, which you can find on this show and the Majority Report, some of which involve some incredibly smart criticisms of Bernie Sanders, some of which I 100% accept, some of which I'm actually not sure I accept, but it's Bill Fletcher Jr., so it's brilliant, right? So, and any person that takes any political or media figure and can't accept criticism of them is innately suspect. It's ridiculous. Everything is contested. Everything is subject to smart critique. And Bernie Sanders, on any number of rhetoric and issues, there's fair-minded, coherent critiques of him, 100%. And those critiques will make him a better candidate if he runs, which I still do think he will. But it's also now, it's like, and I think some of the, I mean, look, there was the demonization of the Clinton people, which was always totally disingenuous, dishonest, and garbage, and that goes back to 2016. And now I think that there's a tendency that I think actually for some, it comes from a really healthy place because they see that some people relate to this campaign in a cult-like way, which is unhealthy and not going to do the job that we need to do, especially if Bernie is elected, frankly. Cannot have cult personality politics. But I also think that there's, in some ways now it's almost like a reach, it's like a new way to prove that you're really cool or something. And I've seen I've seen people, frankly, specifically around, DSA. I mean, some of whom were Clinton supporters in 2016. They have no radical bona fides. And now all of a sudden, because they don't think Bernie did the perfect statement on Venezuela, DSA should have a and look, again, I'll accept I'm not involved with DSA like that, so on and so forth. But most people I know are, and and also obviously we have overlap, and DSA is one of the most important positive things in this country in terms of politics. And I do have a problem with that because look, whatever, have the criticisms. I'm not going to shut down conversation on this show. I'm not going to stand for Bernie. Conversely, in modern politics, if you have the political values that one would presume you have and you're a member of DSA, and you have an opportunity to actually elect a legitimate social democrat in the United States, that's something you do, period. And also people who are still going on with like anti-electoral fantasies. I just, I don't know. You can be far more cerebral, but it just still, to me, amounts to moralistic Green Party bullshit. So I just want to have that dialectic with Bernie. Like, I'm going to play a lot of positive clips of Bernie and acknowledge him a lot because Bernie's a really positive force in modern politics. And when there's necessary and important criticisms, we will do it. But I'm also not going to look for it to, to prove some cred. I think that game's unnecessary.
But just like in the context of the Democratic Socialists of America, I think one thing that is like, if Bernie Sanders was a member of the DSA, right, and he was like he was like the official leader of the DSA, and he was doing some of the stuff that frustrates us a little bit, right? I would have a lot more patience with, you know, being like super critical of Bernie. But the great thing about this organization so far is that it's been able to carve out its own identity separate from Bernie and continue to grow with him. And I think that that's something that's good, right? So if Bernie gets more power, we get more power and notoriety, but we're not so tied to him that we can't survive if Bernie, for example, doesn't run for president or loses or
100%.
whatever. You know, and I think that that's an important thing that a lot of people who make those kind of criticisms of Bernie within the organization sort of forget that, you know, like we associate ourselves with him, but he's not, you know, he's not a member and he's not a figurehead and he's not a spokesperson for the organization.
And he should be actively campaigning
and we should be supporting for him
strongly.
I think so too.
I think the idea of missing an opportunity with Bernie Sanders right now is, and also I'd say,
well, I don't think that's going to happen.
Yeah, I don't think it will happen, but I think, you know, again, don't overcorrect the other tendency. Anyways, this is an example of Bernie being cool. This is explaining his early politics.
Ever since I was a little kid, I really did not like to see bullies. I didn't like to see, you know, stronger kids picking on weaker kids. I didn't like, you know, discrimination, and I didn't like that. I didn't like power plays on the part of people who had the power. But that was just kind of instinctual. And, you know, as a kid, I felt strongly about racism and poverty. And when I went to the University of Chicago, I was not a good student, but what I did do was spend an enormous amount of time down in what they call the stacks of the library. It was a very good library. And I would bury myself in there, reading everything that I could read about history and politics and sociology and economics and psychology. I did a whole lot of reading. I was was not a good student, let's say that. But I did a whole lot of reading. But what the Young People's Socialist League did to me, it helped me put two and two together in my mind. In other words, we don't like poverty, we don't like racism, we don't like war, we don't like exploitation. What do they all have in common? And people say, well, you know, I'm against poverty, but why, for example, at a time when we are the wealthiest country in the history of the world, why do we have 43 million people living in poverty? Why do we have such an unfair distribution of wealth and income? What does wealth and power mean? How does it influence politics? Money always played a dominant role, a very important role in who gets elected. Now, as a result of Citizens United, it is far worse. Who decided that World War I would take place? Who even knows why we went to war in World War I? What was that about? Who makes these decisions? So what my studies tried to do is put two and two and two together. And that is why, you know, I kind of evolved to an analysis which tries to explain to me what goes on in the world today and then.
And here he is. I want to move quickly to this next clip. Do we have the Yemen one? It's on the sheet. So Bernie Sanders has worked assiduously to end the U.S. Co-participation in the Saudi UAE mass murder and slaughter of Yemen. And here he is yesterday reintroducing the resolution to end the Yemen war involvement. He's doing this work with Chris Murphy and Mike Lee, and actually Premila Jayapal, also very good congresswoman, is in the background there as well. There's a House version, but it's so far been spearheaded by Ro Khanna.
According to the United Nations, the war in Yemen could lead to the most severe famine in more than 100 years, with some 100 million people at risk of starvation in one of the poorest countries on earth as a result of this war. According to the aid organization Save the Children, some 85,000 children in Yemen have already died of starvation, and millions more face death if this horrible war continues.
So there he is. This is, and we should all stay very consistent on Yemen. Yemen war continues with unabated U.S. support. There are peace talks ongoing. They're actually on the verge of collapsing again. The prime lobbyists against the support for this mass murder are, of course, Raytheon, Lockheed Martin, and other members of the death cartel industry. Let's go to this AOC clip. just to kind of complete this loop here, because Bernie was talking about the connections that he found as a young person reading. And I think a lot of the real use of college is actually using that time to just go into a good library and read as many books as you can. And but he talked about the connections that do arise out of a socialistic understanding. Now here is AOC, just hands down the most infinitely important and effective young politician in America. She's talking with Ryan Grimm and our friend Brianna Joy Gray for The Intercept. Bree's going to actually be on with us next Thursday. And AOC talks about race and class and how those things are sort of intuitive to talk about with people with certain life experience.
The polling and all of the data and everything that we feel and see shows that the opposite is true, is that communities of color are usually much further to the left than white liberals, because racism, colonialism we understand through lived experience in a way that many don't understand, that these are issues that are part of a hyper-capitalist framework. You know, Black folks are descendants of slaves that were imported, quote unquote, by slave owners to the United States for the explicit purpose of cultivating crops. And it was predicated on white supremacy and racial superiority, but we have to understand that white supremacy exists for a reason. And they exist for very specific cultural and economic reasons. And LBJ talked about this. Like, if you can convince a poor white man that he's superior to a black man, he'll empty his pockets for you. And so it's not just economic reasons why racism exists, but there are economic reasons why racism is perpetuated and incentivized, whether that's housing, income, etc. And like I said on Monday, with Ta-Nehisi, until America tells the truth about itself, we're never going to heal. And it's like this thing that as a culture we hide, we make excuses for, we do the economic anxiety thing when Trump wins, and it's like it's like this big wound with a big ugly scab on it, and it's just gonna stay this itchy thing that we keep going back to until we just deal with it.
So every part of that is 100% true. And do you notice how she both is not indulging in the pseudo-woke neoliberal scam, which says that these are all just free-floating metaphysical things. And the subtext is not only free-floating metaphysical things, we can never do anything about them. So therefore, the only act of politics is to symbolically signify that you oppose said bad thing, versus the actual policy set and shifts of power needed to address it. I would actually argue it also negates potentially some of the deeper work in really ironing these things out, which are psychological and spiritual and so on. But that's the neoliberal scam. Then conversely, look, it's profoundly important to, again, read Adolph Reed, to understand the ways in which neoliberal politics have distorted these very serious things to undermine market critique and, in fact, reify all of these toxicities. This is the same, and by the way, she's exactly the way Ronnie Kasrils, who's one of the liberation struggle leaders that I've interviewed from South Africa, explained apartheid. The roots of apartheid are imperialism and colonialism and theft, and then cultural systems are created in connection to that codify, reinforce, and work with each other. And and that's a Gramscian understanding as well. There's cultural systems that exist alongside the economics, and those systems evolve and adapt. So now we have one system exemplified on the democratic side in certain parts of the global capital order, which recognizes as an example that markets are changing, that demographics are changing, that also you just need the best person in place to fulfill a task. So you have less time in some ways for a certain type of overt bigotry because you just simply need to put the best person in there, and you have less time for some of that real basic bullshit that someone like Trump appeals to. But so there's an emergence of a kind of pseudo-multicultural capitalism, and that horizon is in places like Singapore and Dubai, which are still some of the most ruthless, exploitative places on the planet, but they've also have a certain understanding of how to be global, of how to be multicultural. Then there's the playing to the right-wing populist sentiments that Fletcher identifies, along with unmitigated extraction capitalism. That's Trump, that's the Republican Party, that's Bolsonaro. So she doesn't fall into either of those traps. It's both and we can get out of it. And what I like is there's medicine for both sides of the argument on the left. The medicine for the people on more of the Marxist and economic side is like, yeah, it's racism. And I have to admit, well, I should get it. I enjoyed her saying that in front of her audience. There is racism. That is a major thing. And then conversely, the neoliberal scam that suggests that this isn't connected to economics in terms of a historical understanding, in terms of a strategic approach, and also just sort of reduces all of politics to a basic morality play, is both never going to work, and it also, I mean, it fails everybody, but it does in fact disproportionately fail the communities it claims to speak on behalf of. So she just erased all of that, knocked it out of the park. And that's, as far as I'm concerned, that synthesis and integration is the marching orders for the framework of how to talk about and deal with these things.
Yeah, and what she's doing there is like, and the way that she's able to move from topic to topic is so important.
Yes.
Right, because it's very subtle. But what she's doing is she's really destroying a lot of the paradigms that you see a lot of liberal politicians talking about when she's talking about race and class, for example. I mean, and for example, what she was saying about people of color, you know, being more left-leaning. I mean, that's a very damaging line that is told by a lot of, you know, like centrist Democrats, right? Is that socialism, left-wing philosophy is, you know, the playground of privileged college students. It's like, where the fuck have you been for the entire history of the 20th century, right? Where it's like
it's so profoundly racist.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly.
And who are you following on Twitter?
Well, that's the other thing too. Well, then it also reveals a really, and you know, Waz and I got into this on Woke Bros. And look, and this just has to do with, I'm not making any like, look, the reality is that it's both through reading and also, I'm sorry, yes, you do need to have a little bit of a fucking broader social life, but it comes from a complete elimination of history, not reading the polling data, and also having no sense. Like, these big block terms are a problem. The economy is a problem. National security is a problem. What the fuck does that mean? And even to some extent, when you say, especially the way these people like to play it, like the black community, I don't know what, like, that is a highly diverse, now, of course, there's overlapping oppressions and systems that apply to every single black person, but the concerns and experiences of a Kamala Harris are quite different. They're the same in terms of a certain type of structural racism, but they're also quite different than a Haitian immigrant working in medical services in Queens. And by the way, that also correlates to the polling data, because you can get into the micro of it, and then you know what else you start to see is that actually, like, lower income African Americans and Hispanic people are more to the left on economics, and higher income ones tend to move more towards the right. What a fucking shock. Human beings, like every other fucking human being, have perceived self-interest. And it's so fucking essentializing and condescending to not bother to go out and try to understand the particularities and specificities of a community that you're arming in the service of your own weird social games and garbage politics.
Look, like, you know, like my experience, you know, I grew up very, very poor in the American South. The neighborhood that I grew up in, there was a neighborhood that bordered it. They put up a fence and they put up barbed wire over the fence so that whenever, like, we were playing soccer or football or whatever, if our ball went over, we had to climb a barbed wire fence just to retrieve our ball. Right. Is it surprising that the neighborhoods that I grew up in were predominantly black? Right?
Right.
No,
of course not.
It was because we were poor. And that was something that was made very clear to me, the associations that go on with poverty and race in this country, right? Is it's not just an essential thing. Why was I living in these kind of neighborhoods? It was because we didn't have any money. Why were the other people living in these kind of neighborhoods? Because they didn't have any money. Right. And, you know, there was a lot of reasons why my family didn't have money. And there's a lot of racism which went into why the other people who I lived with had money. And it's just such a frustrating thing when you hear people try to discredit that experience and that reality reality of what it is like in this country, because it's so clear. If you spend time in actual neighborhoods across this country, it's so sad for me to think of the fact that the neighborhood that I lived in is not an anomaly in this country. It's actually quite the norm in most places.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And that is also why, you know, and again, and in that frame, see, and I don't use these terms like erasure, because there's just so much discourse that actually does have, in some cases, some very legitimate academic origins, but it's just been totally destroyed by usage by the pseudo woke Twitterati. But like, her answer didn't erase anything. It didn't erase the reality of white supremacy. It didn't erase the reality of racism. It also didn't erase the mass human suffering that cuts across racial categories and is on class functionality. These are all true simultaneously, of course, along with gender and so on. And it's the type of mentality, you know, it's the type of mentality. And again, look, I don't want to go into it because it's overly anecdotal, but it is like, you know, if Chris Rock does a funny routine about why he won't give change to a homeless white person, that's funny. But if you're actually on Twitter going like, you're a poor white person, I don't ever want to fucking hear about that. That's disgusting. And it belies a complete historical and economic illiteracy that is both morally wrong and a political failure. Do you guys want to watch me debate a crazy person?
Look at this. Yeah, I'd need to see this guy.
By the way, I should, just to say before we play this, it's all suits. From now on out, it's either track suits or suits. That's it. This is me. I was on I-24 last week. This guy's name, I think, is John Loudon, and I think he is the husband of Gina Loudon, who used real psychological theory to explain why Donald Trump is the most mentally healthy president we've ever had. And I debated. Is
real psychological theory a spinoff of The Real News?
Yes. That's exactly it. All right. I'm sure we'll stop and start this thing. It goes on for 5 minutes, but it does. I mean, we might fast forward through part of it, but actually all of it's pretty juicy. But it really goes somewhere in like the last couple of minutes. All right, let's check this out.
So right now, let's talk about this more. We're bringing in Michael Brooks, host of The Michael Brooks Show and co-host of The Majority Report, and John Loudon, political strategist and former Republican state senator in Missouri. Michael, I want to start with you, because this was something that Republicans had predicted would happen if Democrats did gain control of the House. So is this just another witch hunt, as the president has been saying all along?
Well, nothing has been a witch hunt in terms of reality. Sure, of course you'd expect it. You'd expect that any opposition party would do oversight. Let's get to the actual reality here. There's no doubt that this administration has had all sorts of sort of dodgy deals, people in positions they shouldn't be in. Jared Kushner has tried to leverage his position in a variety of ways. It was reported that MBS of Saudi Arabia said that Jared Kushner was in his pocket. And I have to say, you know, just in brief reference to the previous editorial, I guess I have a pretty strong position in contrast in terms of what's going on in Venezuela. And I will say that it's, you know, pretty ironic that an administration with so much... Sorry, I will need to pause sometimes during this. So I should say, I mean, first of all, out of the gate, smooth, polished, collected, and great. I think I'm fucking crushing it. But yeah, before I went on, they had just done like one of the most lopsided far-right Venezuela reports imaginable. And I was sitting there like being like, how am I going to politely register that I find that fucking appalling? And I should say, I'm going to finish this. And actually, I said it's going to get really good in the last couple of minutes, but I think you'll see right out of the gate in this response that it already gets pretty good. Well, and I will say that it's, you know, pretty ironic that an administration with so much incompetence and so much sort of inability to basically operate is now projecting that instability abroad.
And John, I'd like you to weigh in on that too.
Well, listen, you know, first of all, I want to say that I appreciate that the Democrats are concerned about national security. I wish they'd be more concerned about border security. Fascist. But as you said, we're not surprised that they're launching investigations. What I find interesting, and you know, to your guest point, I mean, Jared Kushner, you know, when you've got a Saudi Muslim saying that he's got a Jew in his pocket, you know, I think, well, That's kind of a bold claim. My suspicion is that Jared Kushner is tremendously loyal, not only to the country, but to his father-in-law, and that he is going to protect all the nation's secrets. And so while I welcome a robust investigation to make sure that security is protected, I do smell a double standard here for sure.
Well, I mean, look, there's nothing, I don't really understand the Muslim-Jewish component of that. The component of that is about money flows and influence peddling. And we already saw potential questions around Kushner specifically and the Qatari government trying to bail him out on a failed real estate project, which they turned down, and that actually led to an incoherent administration response on the blockade of Qatar. If you want to talk more broadly, I think there's no doubt that as far as classification goes, there's way too much classification across the board, and intelligence agencies and other bureaucracies probably use unnecessary secrecy to sort of
I'm still thrown off by how he said
That's
Jew.
a legitimate point. What's not a legitimate point is people like Michael Flynn, on the same day they're helping with the Trump transition, writing a proposal to the Turkish government to kidnap a cleric who's based in Pennsylvania to deposit him back in Turkey. That's actually a established and well-reported story,
John,
even more so than the Russia stuff.
John, I want to go back to you quickly regarding
these
claims
like
about
total,
clearances.
like,
are there
SNL
any
TV
claims that you feel
host.
should be looked into?
Or like a Simpsons.
Again, I don't think that there's any problem with an objective investigation into claims, but Elijah Cummings is not exactly known for his statesmanship and nonpartisan nature. Hillary Clinton, where was he when Hillary Clinton had her secret server, when she introduced the world to the term bleach bit and smashing cell phones with hammers?
Feel should be looked into.
Again, I don't think that there's any problem with an objective investigation into claims, but Elijah Cummings is not exactly known for his statesmanship and nonpartisan nature. Hillary Clinton, where was he when Hillary Clinton had her secret server, when she introduced the world to the term bleach bit and smashing cell phones with hammers? You know, there was no interest there other than it was entirely in his interest to cover that up and make excuses for it. But you know what? Again, it is refreshing that Democrats are interested in national security, as long as they do it in a reasonable way and it's not a witch hunt that's unnecessarily intrusive. I don't see a problem with a basic oversight. That's certainly their role.
Very quickly, a moment ago we mentioned a couple of the congressional freshmen who are going to be involved in the investigation here. Two of whom have made names for themselves lately for some fairly public gaffes in interviews. Ocasio-Cortez and Rashida Tlaib, whose anti-Israel rhetoric has had...
Journalists like this love the concept of gaffes.
Love it.
Her in the spotlight a little bit. So what do you say to critics who would argue that these are just two people who are just trying to make a name for themselves right now?
Well, I think they're both doing incredible jobs, and I think it's in testament by the sort of complete inability of Republicans to deal with them and the sort of shambolic response. I know that Rashida Tlaib is obviously has a Palestinian background. I think she's going to have a set of concerns about Palestinian human rights, just as people from my own Jewish community. Sorry?
Pause it. Rewind that. Just to be really clear what he just said there, okay?
Holy shit.
So you can see, we've gone the first couple of minutes, and especially because, by the way, they put me on with fucking lunatics. I joke with the bookers. I'm like, oh, so it's me against like a guy who like escaped from an asylum and wants people to have guns, and you know, it's like they don't appreciate those jokes. But they put me on with, I mean, I remember one guy I was on with one time. I was like, you know, I'm not pedantic about using the word fascism, but it was like, oh, this guy is like literally a brown shirt. Oh yeah. Right? Like, I mean, doing like shit that Trump isn't even saying we're gonna do on immigration. So far I'm actually like, yeah, this is just standard, you know, right-wing bullshit, whatever. And then this happened.
Response. I know that Rashida Tlaib is obviously has a Palestinian background. I think she's going to have a set of concerns about Palestinian human rights, just as people from my own Jewish community. Sorry?
Who married her brother?
She married her brother? Okay, I haven't heard that one. That sounds like we're off in the Newsmax sphere. But look, if we want to be serious,
we can all come together, I think, to deal with, as an example, over bureaucracy and the intelligence services. If you're concerned about the border, that's a fake crisis in terms of Mexico. But if you support a coup in Venezuela, and there's legitimate criticisms of all sides here, but if you instigate a civil war type situation in Venezuela, while you're supporting, by the way, a dictatorship an aspiring dictatorship in Brazil that imprisoned a popular former two-term president.
Oh my gosh.
These things are going to lead to more border and migration. So let's deal with it by dealing with foreign policy.
I would love to spend more time talking about this, Michael Brooks. John Loudon, we thank you so much for your time.
I'm not sure he would have, but I cucked the crazy guy. So actually, no, literally, I went on a date with Gina.
What a stupid married couple.
If they really are a couple, that is fucking
Jesus
appalling.
Christ.
I hope they have not procreated. Yeah.
I hope they have somebody watching them at home.
Seriously. Fucking appalling.
Like they're gonna burn their house down like in the first year.
I thought you turned the microwave off, honey. No, I didn't. I was trying to DM Sean Hannity. I said you wouldn't DM Sean Hannity anymore, honey. It's just work.
Piece of shit.
Total piece of shit.
Asshole,
and by the way, I talked to Sam about this. He's like, they say shit that is so insane and so disgusting that you don't like. I literally it was like when you're a normal person and somebody says something to you, it's like, okay, you know that that's a lie and wrong, but it's like you start to you're like, is he confusing that like they come from the same like town and they have a lake?
Well, they're all from West Palm Beach.
The fuck is going on that you would say that? And then it was funny because all I had to do was basically just be like, I don't know what you're talking about. You're nuts. And then he got a glum look on his face.
I mean, it would have been interesting to see him because that is a long debunked Ilhan Omar right-wing talking point.
So he didn't even get the person right.
No, it is Ilhan Omar.
No, that was Rashida Tlaib.
Oh, really?
So he literally brought a smear lie up about the wrong Muslim.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. I guess that makes sense.
The fuck.
Anyways. And I mean, the guy was really nice, but it was the funny, it was very anchory. It was really, that's some real gaffes this weekend.
Next
like Harry Shearer in Wayne's World.
You know why they like the concept of gaffes is because it has this sort of orientation of social judgment prefigured into the concept. So
right.
Everybody knows how we feel about this, right? Even if it's not necessarily true. Like I always think about the Howard Dean thing, and I don't really I don't really know that era of politics terribly well, but the standard conventional wisdom that it was just that scream that took him down is such an overdetermined it was clearly so many other things.
So many other things.
And that was just the decisive moment where people are like, yeah, fuck it, right?
Totally. 100%. Do we have the Brazil thing that we're going to play? It should have been dropped in there.
It's in the first thing, actually, I put at the very top.
We're going to play 2 more pieces of sound, and then we'll take a call or 2 more and Discord question. Yeah. So this is Griscom, you want to set this up? Well, no, you know
just
what?
hold on. I got to help out with it. Yeah.
All right, let's play that next. Let's play the Steve Schmidt thing first. We'll play the Steve Schmidt thing first. So the thing that I've realized that I actually respect about the Howard Schultz candidacy, the more I think about it, is total props to Bill Burton and Steve Schmidt for just fucking robbing this guy blind on his delusional fantasy run for office. I hope they make an unbelievable amount of money off of this fucking delusional plutocrat.
This is why Steve Smith has been doing the Never Trump stuff this entire time.
Exactly why Steve Smith
This is the exit strategy.
Exactly. Like the guy in Narcos. So here he is, Steve Schmidt on MSNBC, and he's defending the Schultz run. And now this guy, who, by the way, this guy gave us Sarah Palin in 2008. He advised Dick Cheney and George W. Bush. He is a monster of American public life. But for the past couple of years, it's just been like, oh, yeah, Donald Trump's super tasteless. And now here he is. His whole raison d'etre for you even knowing this fucking mediocre operative's name is that he's so appalled by Donald Trump. And Nicole Wallace, of all people, is going to be like, hey, dude, you know this fucking fantasy run? It might reelect Donald Trump. By the way, any other Democrat besides Warren or Sanders, this guy's not going to run. If the Democrats nominate somebody real on Wall Street, you will see this run.
Out of line, out of turn, no deviation, or you are shouted down. And by the way, the people who are doing the shouting almost universally are the same people who said Joe Biden shouldn't run because it was Hillary Clinton's turn. And they're the same people who put their thumb on the scale for Hillary Clinton against Bernie Sanders because he couldn't win. And they guaranteed us that Donald Trump would never be elected.
Well, some of them are sitting right here, and they can all speak for themselves better than I can speak for them. But let me just say, what about the argument that Donald Trump wasn't a Republican or a Democrat? He was a Trumpist. He went in and changed the Republican Party. Why can't someone like Schultz go in and try to win inside a Democratic primary and change the party to be more centrist if that's his mission? Why not just go win in the two lanes that historically elect our president?
I think when we look at the American
primary Trump.
I think when we look at the American Constitution, there is no mention of political parties. In fact, and I think it's important.
But you don't disagree that that's how we choose presidents. Why not?
Well, we have chosen president by all different manners. I mean, the era of the modern primary of direct election, as opposed to the back room by delegates, is a recent invention in American history. I mean, George Washington matters for a couple of reasons in American history, but one of them should be the warning he issued when he left office. What did he warn about? What was his warning that he sent in his farewell into posterity? He warned about factions, about political parties, about tribes at war with each other.
You can out-history me asleep better than I can awake. But my point is, we have never. People are terrified, and people are terrified that you, one of the most visible Trump critics, are now behind someone that they feel like could take away the Democrats' best chance of toppling Donald Trump.
Nobody is voting. The election is 2 years away.
Scared.
Is 2 years away. He has said unequivocally he won't be a spoiler in this race. If at some point in the future, when he goes out and meets the American people, if it's the case that it's a legitimate three-way race, he'll make a decision at the appropriate time to be a candidate or not to be a candidate. What he has said is that when he looks out, the system, in his view, a view I share, it is broken.
All right,
it
we can't
is
take any more of
shattered.
this. Bottom line is, fuck never Trump conservatives unless, here, I'm always trying to enlarge the tent. If their never Trumpism has bled into all of a sudden they say we need Medicare for all of a sudden they recognize the problems with inequality, that's different. But if you've just been spending the past several years sitting in an MSNBC studio going, oh, this is so offensive, blah, 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 what happened to leadership? You're fucking nothing. It's a grift. It's bullshit. It's nonsense. Howard Schultz will drop out 100% if Gillibrand, Biden, O'Rourke, Harris, any of those candidates are the nominee that will protect the corporate order. If Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren or potentially Sherrod Brown is the nominee, he will do everything he can. First and foremost, I'm sure in whatever delusion, because don't forget, all of these people have the Kanye effect. They're billionaires. No one has told sense to them in years. He probably does actually think under the guidance of these idiots that are fleecing him that he could win. But he will probably, I mean, I bet he does not get more than 2-3% of the national vote. It'll be fun to watch the graphs of amount of money spent versus Jill Stein versus amount of votes received. But he could, in vital areas, he could actually spoil it. And that will only happen if the Democrats nominate a candidate that will take on Wall Street. And Politico had the piece. They told you. They gave everybody our voting marching orders. They said, no Sanders, no Warren. Well, thank you. It's pretty clear who we vote for. So
he sucks, though, and he's not charismatic.
No,
he's going to get beat up so easily.
No, what was amazing watching him was actually being like Michael Bloomberg looks like Bill Clinton compared to Howard Schultz.
That's actually pretty true.
I was like, whoa. Like Michael Bloomberg with his fucking sweater just being like, I can't afford that. I was like, oh, look at the swagger on Bloomberg. Well, fucking Howard Schultz was like, I bought a coffee machine and we sold the coffee. And it's like, get the fuck out of here, dude. Nobody wants to hear that bullshit. All right. This is beautiful. I was talking about this with Ben Burgess the other day because he's definitely give them an argument, logic for the left. And he's a big, he's very much, even more so than me, a critic of deplatforming and this sort of thing. And he was saying, we were talking about, it was funny, because for me, because I don't need to intellectualize everything in a certain way, but he's like, he was like, well, but it's interesting for me is like I think we need to debate more and so on. And he's like, but I also remember when that guy punched Richard Spencer, and that was awesome. And I was like, right, exactly. And the thread that we actually figured out was that there actually is one real core difference, frankly, which is like the guy who punched Richard Spencer didn't ask an administrator or authority figure if he could do it. He just did it. That's why it was fucking awesome. I don't know how do you phrase that so you don't promote that or whatever the fuck. Anyways, when that happened, it was I would never say someone should do something like that, but I rewatched him doing that probably literally 50 times.
I think you're willing to pay or do the time.
I'm glad he didn't do the time though.
Oh,
I'm quite glad. I don't think he was ever found.
Oh, I thought the guy who punched Spencer?
Yeah.
Well,
yeah, so that's not my frame. I'm just saying, I'm just going to put it like this. I really enjoyed the video. And I think, well, I would say you should not do stuff like that.
It's not for us to say.
Not for us to comment on. That moment was actually so psychologically important right around the inauguration of Donald Trump. That was the moment. And that actually was, in a way, it's depressing because that actually was a moment where literally everybody from Antifa to Jon Favreau were just like, watch the version with the Jay-Z mix on it. Watch the version with the boys are back in town. It was a sense in which anybody who wasn't either a fascist or was, had their heads so massively up their asses that they could nerd out about it, every decent human being was like, oh, it's so fucking cool. Ugh, let's watch that again.
It's also the sort of thing that if there was no social media component to it, the calls to like condemn it wouldn't really exist at all, right? It's the
100%.
Propaganda value that really scares people about it.
Definitely. And I got my first dose of this of all things when I was just on Majority Report for literally the first couple of months. I was barely even on air yet. And Steven Crowder, of all people, was harassing some union guys in Michigan. And this fucking little union guy clocked him. And I remember asking out loud, I was like, and this is a very different media environment, but I remember literally looking up and being like, do we have to pretend that we don't like this? Brazil had a moment like that, a gang of thugs. And look, let's be really clear. I don't for a second underestimate the horror and dangers of the Trump regime. Children are dying in ICE custody. And at the same time, just in terms of objective reality, there's more circuit breakers in place in the United States in some respects. Brazil was a military dictatorship till the mid-1980s. I mean, this is beautiful. The group of right-wing thugs went to go invade the Cuban embassy. They've already lost doctors there that were serving the poor in this country. And the Brazilian Communist Party, some of their people had like a different opinion of the matter. I love the music. See that? Yes, international fascist come. They're getting right off there. I love how the communists are so good at street choreography that they're kicking these guys' asses with the music up, and the music is playing.
Fuck yeah!
Ugh. Much love to much solidarity and love to Brazil.
Oh man!
All right, you're calling from a 979 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, Michael, this is Bob calling from Texas.
Hey, Bob, what's going on? What's on your mind?
Hey, so what I called in to talk about today is the Max Boot op-ed that was in Washington Post yesterday.
Okay, I did not read it.
Okay, so really what I wanted to talk about was the lead that he wrote for it on Twitter, where his premise was that the wars of intervention and imperialism that the U.S. is in right now is the exact same as the Indian Wars in America, and he mentioned the British on the Northwest frontier, and that's why they're good.
And that's why they're what?
That's why that's why they're good to him.
Wait. So he actually used these appalling historical examples to say that's why they were good.
So that's how we should think about them.
Did you read this, man?
I saw these tweets. It's basically that's how we should think about it.
I can send you the screenshot from his tweet because the little fucking coward deleted them.
I don't even know how to process that. Again, I guess if you want to hit the theme of Steve Schmidt, don't believe never Trumpers.
Yeah, he's got a limited historical imagination, and yeah.
I mean, it also fits in the narrative with the right wing in Venezuela, which wants to continue to oppress indigenous and black people there.
That's exactly right. I mean, that's another way of that's exactly right. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's fucking crazy. I mean, the thing
I was just gonna say, like, even for Max Boot, I found that to be a breathtaking take and just appalling.
It is appalling. I mean, I think though you got to realize, like, if you are a propagandist for U.S. imperialism, you on some level have had to have reconciled yourself to these historical crimes. That's the bottom line. I mean, the only thing that's interesting about Max Boot is he, in some way, like, you know, the people like Schmidt and Rick Wilson are operatives, so I'm a little bit more like, in a way, it's like I give them zero credibility, but in a way, I kind of respect the hustle. Max Boot is a think tank guy, and I'm sure he's quite fine and quite comfortable, but he's not making stupid money off of campaigns or advising corporations, and he's not even, I'm sure he does TV hits, but he's not a regular as far as I know. So the really funny thing that has emerged about Max Boot is, like, to his credit, I guess, he seems to genuinely really not like racism. And he's also one of these people who was in D.C. and so delusional and so disconnected from reality that he really actually thought that there was normal people voting for the Republican Party that wanted to give rich people tax cuts and invade other countries. So, I mean, it's quite a crisis for him.
So, like,
yeah,
I gotta take points away from Max Boot for being against racism when he also says that neoconservative is an anti-Semitic term.
Right. Well, or being cool with the Indian wars. I mean, of course, right. I'm just saying on a relative scale. Absolutely. I'm just saying on a relative scale, when he writes an article saying, like, you know what, actually, racism is pretty bad. It's like, okay. I mean,
so this whiny fuck.
Thanks for the call, man.
This whiny fuck did another piece today in the Washington Post called "On Wednesday, the Twitter mob came for me."
Oh my god!
Which is just a sob story about how, all these people didn't understand. I wasn't endorsing the Indian Wars. I was just saying it's just one of those things. You don't know who's going to win.
You don't know. You don't know. You don't know who's going to win.
It could be the white forces of civilization, or I was like, what the fuck?
It's a history
what the fuck does that mean?
It's so ridiculous. I mean, what he's trying to say is, like, this is going to go on. We're going to be fighting these wars for 300 years.
I think he's saying, in a way, he's saying it's a thought experiment. Infinite content. What's more surprising? Ben Shapiro has a wife. Ben Shapiro's touched a woman and has kids, or that Ben Shapiro's found a woman willing to deal with his BS. I mean, I think you're kind of asking the same question there 3 times, buddy, and it's all very surprising. Michael, TMBS tracks jackets when? That's a great question. I can actually tell you guys, long sleeve tees soon, in development with a day. Don't you think DSA needs to reach out to minorities more? I've asked them about it a few times, no response. Well, I mean, I think they are, depending on the region, to be honest. And I think, I don't know how you've reached out to them.
Yeah.
But I think it's going to depend on the chapter and the branch. There's no doubt that, there's a certain, I mean, look, a lot of this stuff is definitely, while policy-wise, the idea that left policies are not broadly popular to people of color is a pure lie. There's no doubt that scenes like DSA are disproportionately dominated by, white college graduates.
I think it's also one of those things where it's like it's going to depend a lot on the chapter, and it's one of those things where you really have to focus a lot too on doing things that are bringing people into the meeting, because something that isn't constructive, which does happen a lot, is a meeting of just a bunch of white people.
Right.
Where somebody goes up and they talk for 5 minutes about how sad it is that there aren't any people of color. And typically, at least in my experience, that can be very alienating.
Right.
If you're with people who are of color, who are sitting there and they're like, well, what the fuck are you talking about, right?
Yes.
So there's,
I think it's basically, and I'm not an expert, but you'd want to be seen organizing around issues that appeal to those people.
And I think that there are some chapters that are doing a really good job of that. I think there's some that it's lacking. And I think it's an important thing to always be aware of.
And I also, but I think there's also something important about what you said, which is just like also some, like, what's the dialectic of knowing that that work is urgent, necessary, and vital, but also not turning it into another like white melodrama, and acting in such a way where you clearly have never had any experience outside of an incredibly narrow set of people.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm going to read this out loud. Maybe we'll throw this up, but someone asks us to consider their 2020 Democratic primary voting guide. This is great. It's a grid, and it starts at the top is welcome their hatred. And then one box is, does Wall Street find them acceptable? Then the next arrow says no. Then it goes down to yes. And then the next question in the next box is Bernie running? And then there's a yes for Bernie, a no for Warren if Bernie is running. If Bernie isn't running, then it's Warren. I agree. I think that is what's funny is like there's a lot of complexities in the 2020 race, but I find like who's on the table to vote for in the primary is like profoundly easy to me. It's Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. Michael, in your opinion, will Bernie or AOC make the connection between housing and healthcare in the future, and college for all and Medicare for all are great, but we also need housing for all? I think so, and I also think in the interview with The Intercept, Ocasio-Cortez, I actually think it's funny. She must have other people on it because I don't think you can manage that all yourself if you're also a congressman, but I think she actually I think she's in her own accounts, and she's very strategic about that.
She says she is.
I believe her because of how she talked about it. And they do measure response. So I think with Congress people like that, you have a lot of opportunity. I wish he had won, but Kaniela Ng, who he interviewed from Hawaii, was trying to make that his unique spin on the DSA campaign.
And DSA also has made an effort to focus a lot more on housing justice. So
love it. No, I mean that's the next horizon issue. Yeah. DSA is doing amazing work with that. Tech Life. Hey Michael, in your new book, do you discuss Julius Evola and all, and how he is similar to many in the IDW, Jordan Peterson, Kevin Williamson? Not so much. Kevin Evola is more on that sort of fascist Bannon thing, which I think definitely has overlap with Peterson, but Peterson is, I'm contrasting him with Christopher Lasch, James Hillman, and then sort of taking him in his own terms and critiquing. Congressional baseball fan, as long as we're proposing new holidays that Mitch McConnell hates, do you think that we should support a national day of baseball? Question from Mishnow. Can you guys explain Thaddeus Russell to me? He hates socialists, hates liberals, and he hates conservatives. He also claims he's not a libertarian. I'm smitten by his anti-hard work stance, but to me, socialism is the only way we can all stay home and play video games all day. I did Thaddeus Russell's show. I had a great time. He is a genuinely very nice guy. He's very smart, and he has interesting takes. And he's also, like, I think he's kind of honestly just like a pathological contrarian. And sometimes that leads him to brilliance, and sometimes that leads him to just like
libertarianism.
Yeah, which is a polite way of saying pedant nonsense. But look, this is in the post game, and I actually said this to his face. If you look at his bio and the way he speaks about his parents, who are both communists, I think if his parents were less dicky, his politics would be better. I mean, to be honest with you, and I don't mean that as a cheap shot. I really do think context matters and where you're coming from. And I think some of his reactions to some things that actually I probably agree with him on the left. Like I think there's plenty of problems that we need to do house cleaning, but like I saw a lot of things in the environment and context that I grew up in, and I see things every day on the left that I think are either just straight up wrong, or or maybe I'm slightly exaggerating, but I have like a huge amount of internal critique, some of which I think is actually like really important, like really needs to be dealt with. But I've always been able, for whatever reason, to also to know that and even see the importance of some of these things, and also be like, and the World Bank is destroying Zimbabwe. And I don't support, U.S. coups, and everybody needs healthcare, and everybody needs housing. Like there's some really simple anchorings, which I'm not, I think Thad has a different perspective on. I agree with you. His utopia would be, ironically, some type of libertarian socialism. And the one thing in which he's not a libertarian in two ways. One is that he does actually acknowledge the coercive power of private work. And what's really funny is he's like, has all these skepticisms of safety nets, but he really likes workers striking. So, I don't know. But he's a nice guy. He's fun to talk to. And he has a great critique of people like Sam Harris. He's actually, the last thing I'll say about him, he's another great example of why Jordan Peterson is fucking ridiculous. Because Thaddeus Russell is the most thoroughgoing postmodernist I know. Like, Thaddeus Russell is a pure postmodernist. I actually don't know people, including people very much on the left, who like the usual thing is like sex is objective and gender is constructed. Like Thad thinks sex is constructed. Like Thad is a fundamental postmodernist, which leads to a lot of brilliant thinking, but also is not essential for an anti-capitalist critique. K-State Nate, Michael, what do we have to do to get Sam in the 2020 libertarian debate? I have no idea, but that's a hilarious idea. Michael, why would you allow anyone to be a Knicks fan? Will the Mavs become the unofficial NBA team of the right?
Because Kristaps Porzingis was traded to the Mavericks, so now they have Luka Doncic and Kristaps Porzingis. And Mark Cuban is recently.
And Mark Cuban.
Mark Cuban's involved in that shit?
Mark
then
Cuban,
they will be, yes.
Yeah, he said that if American players could go learn under Eastern European coaches, they might learn a lot. So,
Comrade de Hornsey, what happened to the suits, Michael? Well, they're coming in and out. Is this a mafioso look now? Looking forward to the show tomorrow. Dipset, Wu-Tang, Dipset. Well, first of all, tracksuits are actually very dapper in my opinion. And suits, I might be wearing the suit I wore on I-24 to a live show tomorrow. I might be wearing a suit next week. You never know. Gotta be dynamic. Question from Myth Schmechter. Sup, my peeps? This week on Morning with a U in America, my co-host Lon Istagrone and I have on Marcus Molitzis to discuss the bombshell video of Bernie being naked and cool in Russia. I'm afraid to even let my wife see it without my shirt on. Am I afraid? Maybe. And also, why do ignorant hordes in the labor movement think they helped open the government? We all know it was Nancy Pelosi. She makes bloody moves, folks. Remember, if you donate $33 to the pod, I'll send you exclusive pictures of Carrie Fisher in the Return of the Jedi bikini taken just last week. Unrelated to, does anybody know how to get rid of a shovel? Wow. It's going real deep there. All right, we got to take one more call and then we have to sign off. I'm sorry I couldn't get to all of you. I will get to you next week. You're calling from an 818 area code with the final call of the night.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Is this Dave from Jamaica?
Yes, this is Dave from Jamaica.
Dave from Jamaica, what's on your mind?
Yes, I'll get to it. So, to take off an interesting point that Bill Fletcher Jr. brought up, how do we, in the primary that's coming up, and I know older voters, black, whoever, tend to go for the more neo-lib or conservative candidate, generally speaking, right?
I don't know.
You want, I don't know. I have anecdotal evidence because it's my circles I hang out with. It's going to be a tough haul to kind of defeat Kamala Harris because a lot of people have that tribal instinct, homegirl on her team type of thing going on.
We'll see.
So how do you do the hard work to kind of move these people along? So kind of, you know, show that Kamala Harris is not that person they think that she is.
Well, you're talking about Kamala Harris specifically? I mean, I think that, and this is just, you know, this is just me spitballing, but I actually outlined last week a little bit how I think specifically how Kamala Harris should be dealt with in terms of rhetoric and strategy. But I guess the way I would look at it, to be honest, is if I was doing strategy for something like Bernie, I would disaggregate three things right out of the gate. I would say, look, maybe there's a portion of voters. I don't know how large this portion is, and I don't think anybody does. They might just say, whether they're African American or a woman, that's it. I want that history. Nothing else matters to me. Everything else is secondary. There's nothing you can do about that other than, look, it would be dishonest if I said I didn't disagree with that, but I respect it. Completely understand. I understand the sentiment entirely, even if I disagree on the merits. Then the second thing to look at then is I think actually to really quickly disaggregate. And look, and the disaggregation is class-based. I mean, Kamala Harris, I mean, we'll see what direction she goes in, but who she is, just even in terms of education level and demographics and her family and her career, is a upper middle class, you know, highly educated, affluent, and highly credentialed middle class, upper middle class person. And the policy set and the policy history reflects that. So I would, and for what it's worth, I mean, the easiest substitute for this class-based analysis has been demographics, because these economic issues have fallen so disproportionately on younger people, and everybody always makes the point, but it is true. Bernie beat Hillary Clinton with African-American voters under 30. So I just think you on one hand, of course, sorry?
Yeah, go ahead, sorry. I'm not worried about the youth vote at all.
Well, no, but I think it expands. Yeah. I think it goes much more broadly out. And I think that, look, one part of it, and I have no doubt if Bernie runs, he will communicate much more adroitly and effectively on race. I think that whoever is doing his policy package has to have a really robust plan on policing and prison reform, no doubt. And then I also just think beyond that, and part of it will help Bernie, again, people keep forgetting, he's the most popular politician in the United States. People know who he is now. And he just needs to go out like a laser beam with the broader focus that includes race and a broader set of issues, and just be like, look, for a vast majority of people, Medicare for all is the right policy. Free college is the right policy. Labor unions being powerful is the right thing. As Adolph Reed said, what organization in the United States represents more women of color than any other group? The AFL-CIO. And you have to, in an intelligent and savvy and integrative way, make that case. If I had my druthers, if it was up to me, and obviously it's not, I think if Bernie Sanders came out and he was in a position where he could say, I'm running and I pre-select, if I am blessed to get the nomination, and she's right here on me with stage right now, Stacey Abrams is my running mate, and we're going to take this to the country. And then just pick it apart, and we'll see what happens. That's what I think. And be smart and be sensitive and be aware, and also don't fall for that neoliberal bullshit at all. And, you know, that try to pit these things against each other. Dave, thanks a million for the call. All right, folks, we got to go. We got to go put the finishing touches on our live show, everybody. This Sunday, Idea Primer with Ralph Leonard. Next week, it is Thursday show again with Bree Joy Gray. Make sure all of your info is up to date tomorrow on the 1st. Keep spreading the word. Thank you to the whole team. Thanks to each and every one of you. We'll see you soon.